What does it mean for a language to be endangered? What about safe, vulnerable, extinct? How do we measure language endangerment? When researching languages online, I'm sure most of us have come across labels such as severely endangered, critically endangered, moribund, dormant, and many others. What does all of this mean? What does it depend on, and what's the difference? Hello everyone, my name is Sean, and today we are talking about degrees of language endangerment. I've been meaning to make a video like this for a while in order to act as a sort of reference point for many other topics that I talk about. I'd like to discuss and clarify a few things so that we're all on the same page, because many of these buzzwords are used all the time and the actual definitions can get incredibly confusing, and honestly just making the script for this video made my head spin. In order to understand language endangerment and to talk about the what and the why, we first must talk about the who. Who's in charge of these measurements? After looking at a bunch of articles and websites, I've determined there to be three main organizations that have their own scales: UNESCO, the Endangered Languages Project, and SIL International. Each one of these has their own frameworks, criteria, and publications, and I'd like to break each of them down with a few examples, explain how they function, what their purpose is, and in the end we'll compare and contrast them to see how they are similar, how they are different, and who uses either one of them. One final thing before getting into it: please keep in mind that languages and attitudes are ever-changing and ever-evolving, meaning that this video and the examples that I give are bound to become outdated in one way or another someday. Either way, first off, we have the big guys, UNESCO, who are an agency within the United Nations, and they created the Language Vitality and Endangerment Framework in 2003. This is the one that most people are likely to come across when doing surface research. It's the one that you see under languages on Wikipedia, and in general, it's probably the most widespread of the scales. This framework evaluates languages based on 9 criteria, most important of which is the first: intergenerational transmission. You know, do parents pass on the language to their children? Is the language spoken by all generations? Next, we have absolute number of speakers. Just straight up, how many people speak it? Proportion of speakers within the total population. What percentage of the above number is it out of the entire community? Is it spoken throughout the territory, or is it just these few tiny random villages? Trends in existing language domains. Basically, which contexts is this language used in? Is it use this language only to talk to your grandparents type of thing? Or is it use this language to shop and file taxes type of thing? Response to new domains and media. Is it being adopted into new contexts as well? Can I watch a movie, listen to music, and explore dank memes in this language? Materials for language education and literacy. Does an alphabet exist? Can my children study, read, and write in the language and use it to get through school? Governmental and institutional language attitudes and policies, including official status and use. Does the government care about my language? Can I use my language in court and in parliament? Will the government support my right to use my language officially? Community members' attitudes towards their own language. Do mine own people care about our language? Do they see it as a burden and would rather see it die, or are we gonna actively fight to preserve it? And last but not least, amount and quality of documentation. Have the researchers researched it enough? Are there grammars, audio and visual recordings, transcriptions and translations? Each language is evaluated on all of the above and then rated on a 6-point scale, 5 to 0, with 5 being safe and 0 being extinct. Now let's just briefly go over these levels and give a real-world example for each. Starting with safe, meaning it's used by all generations and no worries here. An example for this is, well, English, the lowest hanging fruit. It's used by everyone everywhere and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Then there is vulnerable, meaning it's still being passed down to children and mostly all as well, but it isn't necessarily being spoken everywhere always and may be restricted to certain contexts. An example for this is Welsh. It's spoken by over 1 million people, or like 20% of the Welsh population. There are Welsh schools, the government is all about promoting it, but it isn't really as pervasive as English, you know, and there are still certain risks in certain areas. Next up is definitely endangered, and an example for this is Scottish Gaelic. As of 2022, there are only about 70,000 people who speak it, just over 1% of the population of Scotland, and compare that to 210,000 plus at the turn of the 19th century, and probably hundreds of thousands of more before that. There are some immersion schools, and there are certainly still children and whole families who speak it today, but it has been declining rather rapidly over the past couple of centuries, and today pretty much every speaker of Scottish Gaelic is also bilingual in English. While some say that the future looks promising, and I personally would also very much hope so, for now it still rests in the definitely endangered category. Following that is severely endangered, and an example for this is the Cherokee language. And sadly, about a third of all North American indigenous languages are also in this category. As of 2019, there are only about 2,000 speakers, and that estimate is somewhat generous as is. The Tahlequah Daily Press, which is a local newspaper at the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, stated that most speakers are elderly and that there are only 5 fluent speakers under the age of 50. While I'm a bit skeptical of the last point, and there are many revival efforts and immersion schools and many programs, and it does look promising, unfortunately, so much damage has already been done. It's in an overall dire state relative to what it was decades and centuries ago, thus making it severely endangered, at least for now. Next is critically endangered. An example for this is the Nukhalk language of British Columbia, Canada. A report from 2014 states that there are only 17 fluent speakers remaining, and another from 2021 states there are only 3 fluent speakers remaining, all of whom are already in their 70s and 80s. While again, there are revival programs growing on with reportedly hundreds of learners, and I wish them all the absolute best because Nukhalk is one of the coolest languages of all time. Unfortunately, realistically, it's hard to say how much of a chance it really has at this point, so sadly, critically endangered it is, for now. And lastly, the final category at level 0 is extinct. There are obviously a ton of examples of this, but a recent one would be Yamana, or Yagan, which I talked about in a recent video of mine if you want more information. Native to Tierra del Fuego at the very tip of South America, the last native speaker passed away in 2022 at the age of 93. And while there still may be some people who know some words and phrases, some scholars who study it, and people who still fully identify as being part of the ethnic community, realistically and for all intents and purposes, there are no longer any more fluent speakers. Nobody uses the language to converse casually between each other. And so it's essentially now an extinct language, at least for now. There are also plenty of real-world examples of languages being recategorized and moving up and down the endangerment scale. One example of moving up is the Manx language. It was officially declared extinct in 2009 by UNESCO because the last native speaker died in 1974. But the extinction label didn't really fit very well because there have been so many revival efforts going on over the past couple of decades, and today there are hundreds of speakers and children in immersion schools actually speaking Manx, and potentially some neo-native speakers. So in 2015, UNESCO reclassified Manx to be now critically endangered, up from extinct. A counterexample to this is the Ainu language of Japan. Based on data from the 80s and 90s, it was initially classified as severely endangered. But then after a couple of years and a closer look, unfortunately it had to be reclassified to critically endangered because of just lack of speakers and no intergenerational transmission to children. Again, as mentioned, the scale is very fluid, so languages can and do go up and down, but obviously, unfortunately, there are way more examples of languages slipping down the scale than going back up, since for a million reasons it takes so much effort to actually climb up the scale. This is the general gist of UNESCO's 6-point language endangerment scale, and all of it used to be published in the Red Book of Endangered Languages, which was then replaced by UNESCO's Atlas of the World's Languages in Danger, the 2010 edition of which is still the most widely cited digital version that you still see in most places, including the aforementioned Wikipedia. And finally, there's the World Atlas of Languages, launched in 2022 and meant to replace the old atlas. However, it's still in development and isn't as widely used yet, and their website seems to be down for some reason. So there you have it. In summary, the most widely used scale for language endangerment was developed by UNESCO, known as the Language Vitality and Endangerment Framework, which includes 9 criteria, which are then rated on a 6-point scale from safe to extinct, and is published in the World Atlas of Languages, which is their most recent publication iteration. It isn't crowdsourced, but it gets all of its data from various experts, linguists, and researchers who do field work, conduct interviews, and publish literature, and it's all compiled here. I personally think it's the easiest one to use, and I would recommend it to most people when starting to do your research. For the next players in the game, please welcome ELP, the Endangered Languages Project. In a nutshell, some people at the University of Hawaii, including legendary linguist Lyle Campbell, created ELCAT, the Endangered Languages Catalog. It was used as a foundation for launching the Endangered Languages Project, and today is maintained by the University of Hawaii along with various other organizations, including Eastern Michigan University and the First Peoples Cultural Council in Canada. Also, the Endangered Languages Project is open access and invites contributions from the public, like you and me. ELP uses a framework called the Language Endangerment Index, which evaluates languages based on 4 core criteria. The most important of which, just like with UNESCO, being intergenerational transmission. Is the language being passed on to children? Then there's also absolute number of speakers, speaker number trends, and domains of use. Basically just a more condensed version of UNESCO's criteria. All of the above is rated on a 6-point scale, which is inverted from UNESCO's point of view, with 0 being safe and 5 being critically endangered. Incredibly confusingly, ELP doesn't really list extinct languages unlike UNESCO, so when comparing the two scales side by side, ELP basically omits the final extinct level and instead adds an extra level of endangerment. So starting with safe, you then go on to vulnerable, threatened, endangered, severely endangered, and finally critically endangered. With extinct languages being on the secret extra level, as again, ELP doesn't really do languages that are fully extinct, and you can find out why on their website where they discuss the problematic nature of the term extinct in certain contexts. Still a great initiative with a wonderful website and tons of resources which you yourself can contribute to right now, and I highly recommend you check it out. My only gripe with it, and by extension, I guess in conjunction with UNESCO, you guys should really just meet up and try to figure out this inverse scale situation. UNESCO has the upper hand, technically, since it's the older of the two, but whatever you guys do, please do something, because it's Confusion City over here, population me. In summary, the Endangered Languages Project uses the LEI framework developed by ELCAT and in turn the University of Hawaii and is managed by a bunch of other organizations. It evaluates languages based on 4 criteria and rates them on a scale from 0 to 5, typically excluding extinct languages. And now please welcome the third giant of the language endangerment field, SIL International, also known as SIL Global sometimes apparently. These guys are the oldest and also probably the most controversial of the bunch. SIL International is officially a non-profit evangelical Christian organization whose main purpose is to document endangered languages and to translate the Bible into them. On paper, they're basically missionaries. In reality, however, it's a bit more nuanced than that. And at least to an outside observer such as myself, it no longer seems like their primary goal is to aggressively convert indigenous peoples all over the world. Out of the 3, SIL International is probably the most detailed, thorough, and academic in its pursuits. Their primary publication, which I'm sure most people watching this video would have at least heard of before, is called Ethnologue, published since 1951. Their latest edition, the 2025 one, lists 7,159 living languages and a bunch more that are extinct. They use a framework called the Expanded Graded Intergeneration Disruption Scale, or EGIDS, EGIDS for short, I guess, the history of which is really complicated and you don't have to worry about it. It doesn't really have a core set of criteria like the other two, but rather it uses various sociolinguistic descriptions. Instead though, EGIDS uses a 13-level scale which ranges from 0, called international, all the way to 10, which is extinct. Please visit their website and a full and very detailed explanation of how and why it works the way that it does. The reason it's 13 levels, but it goes only from 0 to 10 is because when it gets to the endangerment portion, it sort of like breaks it down even more into A and B sections. Also, this is where you find the terms moribund and dormant, both of which are levels towards the bottom, sort of straddling the extinction portion. While it's undeniably a great resource and it's academically reviewed and it's used by thousands upon thousands of researchers and institutes, the biggest issue with Ethnologue, in my opinion, is the difficulty to access it. It is ridiculously expensive. There are a few different price points, right? But if you want the standard, billed monthly, it's $1,000 per month. That's more than my rent. Like, Or you can just do it for a whole year and then it's heavily discounted. It's only $2,400 per year, which is like $200 a month. What a deal. To be fair, like when you read into it, there are so many people involved in this and there's just so many resources needed to maintain it. It actually cost them about $1 million per year just to operate it, hence the price. And they definitely don't have access to as many resources as the UN. And for the most part, these subscriptions are usually bought in bundles by universities and companies who definitely have no problem affording it. So, all in all, an incredible feat of labor and a very valuable resource, but not really very accessible to the average person, and is mostly only used by academics and policymakers. All in all, they all do similar things, but they are not the same. They were all created at various times for different reasons and different scopes. They are to be used in conjunction with one another and not in opposition. At least not always. It's important to note that the same language may sometimes be rated as a bit higher or a bit lower, depending on the scale, since they do prioritize slightly different things. If I may, in my opinion, the best way of remembering which is comparing the 3 language endangerment scales to our temperature scales. UNESCO, being by far the most popular worldwide, is like Celsius. ELP is cool and fun and open source and has a bigger presence in North America, which is why it's like Fahrenheit. And Ethnologue is the most technical and used for scientific purposes, so it's like Kelvin. This is a flawless comparison and it fits so neatly in my head and I find it hilarious, which is why I will not be accepting any criticism of it. Thank you in advance. Lastly, I just want to mention a few other final things that are sort of on the same vein as language endangerment catalogs, and you may have heard of them. First of all, yes, there are other scales as well out there in the world, mostly national and regional ones. For example, there is the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, or IATSIS for short, which, as the name implies, deals specifically with Australian Aboriginal languages. Also, we've talked about Ethnologue, but what about Glottolog and WALS.info and other similar things? What's their deal and what do they do? So they don't deal with language endangerment at all. Instead, they focus on typology and taxonomy. Typology deals with shared ancestry, family trees, relationships of languages to each other. What languages belong to the Indo-European language family? What about the Austronesian one? What languages are isolates? This is exactly what Glottolog does, and it's known for its detailed bibliographies and effort to catalog every language variety on Earth, even including some super tiny and obscure ones that may not even be listed in other places. Taxonomy, on the other hand, deals with functional and structural similarities between languages and grouping them based on shared linguistic features. Which languages follow the SOV word order? Which languages are ergative absolutive? What is the distribution of suffixing versus prefixing languages around the world? And that is exactly what WALS.info does. Honestly, I love this website so much. You can explore the whole world based on some obscure linguistic feature and see sort of weird patterns and where it's more or less prevalent across the world. Is highly recommend, super useful, super fun. And then there's a ton of other similar databases that focus on a particular thing, like you have Phoible, for example, which is specifically about phonological inventories, or you have Lexibank, for example, which is a word list repository with both phonological and lexical features, etc, etc, etc. So in the end, whether you're tracking which languages are endangered, how they're transmitted, or how they're structured and classified, there's a whole ecosystem of tools out there in the wonderful world of linguistics. Each database has its own strengths and weaknesses and focuses on a different piece of the puzzle, but together they paint an incredibly rich picture of the miracle that is human language. Either way, that's about it. I hope you learned something new about how the world evaluates and categorizes endangered languages. I know that this video was a bit dry and technical and, dare I say, bureaucratic? Anyone who knows me well will testify to the fact that there is nothing that I hate more in this godforsaken world than the pure, unadulterated evil that is bureaucracy. Ugh, honestly, just saying that word makes me physically sick. Disgusting. Which is why, never again. Back to more fun stuff next video very soon. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day and a wonderful night. See you later.